The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the Central Bank of Burkina Faso as Aminata Sawadogo settled into her workstation. At 26 years old, she had been working as a currency verification clerk for 3 years, developing an almost supernatural ability to detect irregularities in banknotes. Her colleagues often joked that she could spot a fake note from across the room, but none of them realized just how prophetic that jest would prove to be. On this particular Tuesday in March, Aminata was processing a routine batch of 10,000 franc notes that had been collected from various commercial banks across Ouagadougou. The morning had been unremarkable. Coffee, small talk with colleagues, and the familiar rhythm of counting and verifying currency. But as her fingers moved through the stack of bills, something made her pause. The texture felt perfect. The weight was exactly right. The colors were vibrant and true. Even the distinctive watermark of the national coat of arms appeared flawless when held up to the light. Yet something deep in her trained instinct screamed that these notes were wrong. "Marie," she called to her supervisor, Marie Ouedraogo, who was reviewing monthly reports at a nearby desk. "Could you come look at this?" Marie, a veteran of 15 years in currency verification, approached with the weary expression of someone who had seen every possible printing error and minor irregularity. "What is it now, Aminata? Another batch with smudged ink?" "No, it's not that." Aminata's voice carried an unusual tension. "These notes, they feel perfect, but something is off. I can't explain it." Marie took the bills and examined them with practiced eyes, running her fingers along the edges, checking the raised print, holding them up to the light. After several minutes of careful inspection, she frowned. "They look fine to me. What exactly do you think is wrong?" "I don't know. That's what's bothering me." Aminata retrieved the notes and examined them again. "The paper quality is excellent, maybe even better than usual. The printing is crisp, but—" She paused, struggling to articulate her concern. "Have you ever seen anything that looked too perfect? These notes look like they were made by someone trying very hard to create perfect currency." Marie's skepticism was evident, but she had learned to trust Aminata's instincts over the years. The young woman had caught several instances of minor counterfeiting that others had missed. "All right, let's run them through the full verification process. If you're right, we'll catch it." They moved to the advanced verification station, equipped with UV lights, magnetic readers, and microscopic examination tools. The initial tests all came back positive. The notes passed every standard check. But when they placed them under the high-powered microscope, Aminata's suspicions were confirmed. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing to the screen. "The microprinting is too perfect. Real currency has tiny inconsistencies in the microprint because of the natural variations in the printing process. This text is mathematically perfect, every letter identical, every spacing exact." Marie leaned in closer, her expression growing serious. "You're right. This is machine-perfect printing. Our government presses don't produce this level of consistency." She straightened up, the color draining from her face. "Aminata, I need you to gather every note from this batch and secure them immediately. Don't let anyone else handle them, and don't discuss this with anyone. You think they're counterfeit?" "I think we might be looking at the most sophisticated counterfeiting operation we've ever encountered." Within an hour, the secure conference room on the bank's top floor was filled with the institution's senior leadership. Governor Lassina Zerbo, a distinguished economist who had guided the central bank through several financial crises, examined the suspect notes with increasing alarm. Beside him sat Deputy Governor Fatoumata Sawadogo, Chief Security Officer Paul Caboret, and Bank Manager Jean-Claude Caboret. "Gentlemen, ladies," Governor Zerbo began, his voice grave, "if Miss Sawadogo's assessment is correct, we are facing an unprecedented threat to our monetary system." He held up one of the suspect notes. "These counterfeits are of such high quality that they pass all standard detection methods. Only microscopic analysis reveals their fraudulent nature." Chief Security Officer Caboret leaned forward. "How many of these notes have we identified so far?" "From this morning's batch alone, approximately 500,000 francs worth," Marie reported. "But that's just what we've examined. If these are circulating in the general population, the implications could be catastrophic," Deputy Governor Sawadogo finished. "If high-quality counterfeits are flooding our market, we could see rapid inflation, loss of confidence in our currency, and economic collapse. Governor Zerbo stood and began pacing. This is not a random criminal enterprise. The sophistication required to produce notes of this quality suggests significant resources, advanced technology, and detailed knowledge of our security features. We're looking at either state-sponsored activity or a well-financed international criminal organization. What's our next step? Asked Bank Manager Cabaret. We inform the finance minister immediately, and through him, the president. This is a matter of national security. The governor's voice was firm. In the meantime, we implement Protocol 7, complete lockdown of information. Nothing leaves this room without my authorization. We need to assess the full scope of this threat before it becomes public knowledge. As the emergency meeting concluded, none of the participants could have imagined that they had just uncovered the tip of an iceberg that would shake the foundations of Burkina Faso's sovereignty and expose a conspiracy reaching into the highest levels of government and across international borders. Finance Minister Labouni Bongai was in the middle of reviewing budget allocations when his secure phone rang. The caller ID showed Governor Zerbo's direct line, and the use of this particular phone meant only one thing: a crisis of the highest magnitude. Governor, what's the situation? Minister, we have a code red scenario. I need to brief you immediately, and then we need to inform the president. This cannot wait. 20 minutes later, Minister Bongui was staring at the counterfeit notes spread across Governor Zerbo's desk, his face growing paler with each detail of the explanation. As a former economist himself, he immediately grasped the catastrophic implications. My God, he whispered. If these are already circulating, how much are we talking about? We don't know yet. But based on the quality and the fact that they're passing standard checks, this could represent hundreds of millions, possibly billions of francs in fake currency. The finance minister's hands trembled slightly as he reached for his phone. I need to call the president immediately. President Ibrahim Traoré was in his private office, reviewing intelligence reports from the region, when his red phone, reserved for the most urgent national security matters, rang. The president's day had been relatively calm, filled with routine meetings about infrastructure development and agricultural programs. That tranquility was about to be shattered. Mr. President, this is Minister Bongui. I need to see you immediately. We have a national emergency. What kind of emergency? Economic warfare, sir. Someone is attacking our currency with sophisticated counterfeits. I'm coming to you now with Governor Zerbo. President Traoré felt his blood pressure spike. At 34, he had led Burkina Faso through military coups, regional instability, and international pressure. But an attack on the country's monetary system represented a new and particularly insidious threat. Come immediately, and bring everything. 30 minutes later, the president's private office had been transformed into a crisis command center. Present were Finance Minister Bongui, Central Bank Governor Zerbo, Defense Minister Colonel Claude Ouedraogo, Interior Minister Emile Zerbo, and Intelligence Chief Commander Ismael Ouedraogo. President Traoré examined the counterfeit notes with the intensity of a man who understood that his nation's future might hang in the balance. His jaw tightened as he absorbed the technical details of the counterfeiting operation. Gentlemen, he said finally, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a leader pushed beyond his limits. What we're looking at here is not ordinary criminal activity. This is economic warfare of the most sophisticated kind. He slammed his fist on the desk, causing the fake bills to scatter. Someone is trying to destroy our economy from within. The room fell silent. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would define their administration and possibly their nation's future. Defense Minister, the president continued, what are the implications if significant amounts of this fake currency are already circulating? Colonel Ouedraogo consulted his notes. Sir, economic destabilization of this magnitude could lead to rapid inflation, collapse of public confidence in our institutions, social unrest, and potentially create conditions for political upheaval. It's a classic soft power attack designed to weaken us without conventional military engagement. Intelligence Chief Ouedraogo cleared his throat. Mr. President, I need to report something that might be related. Over the past 6 weeks, we've noticed unusual patterns in currency circulation. Commercial banks have been reporting larger than normal cash deposits and withdrawals. We initially attributed this to seasonal business cycles, but now it looks like someone has been systematically introducing counterfeit currency into our financial system, the president finished. How long have we been under attack without knowing it? Potentially months, sir. The president stood and began pacing behind his desk, a habit his staff recognized as a sign of intense mental calculation. This level of sophistication suggests state-level resources. The technology, the knowledge of our security features, the scale of the operation. We're not dealing with ordinary criminals. Finance Minister Bongi leaned forward. Sir, we need to consider the possibility that this is connected to our recent policies. Our moves toward monetary independence, the discussions about leaving the CFA franc zone, our increased cooperation with non-Western partners. These actions have made enemies. You're suggesting this is retaliation? I'm suggesting this is exactly the kind of response we should expect from forces that profit from our economic dependence. President Traoré stopped pacing and turned to face his team. Then we treat this as an act of war. Not a conventional war, but war nonetheless. His voice hardened. Gentlemen, as of this moment, we are on a war footing. I want a joint task force established immediately. Intelligence, military, financial experts, and law enforcement. We will find who is behind this. We will stop them, and we will make an example that shows the world that Burkina Faso cannot be conquered by fake money or any other means. Interior Minister Zerbo raised his hand. Sir, what about information security? If word of this leaks before we can respond, it could trigger exactly the kind of panic our enemies are hoping for. The president agreed. Nobody talks. Nobody leaks. We hunt in silence until we're ready to strike. As the meeting continued late into the night, President Traoré outlined the formation of what would become known as Operation Monetary Shield, a comprehensive response that would ultimately expose a conspiracy reaching far beyond Burkina Faso's borders and involving some of the most powerful forces in international finance and geopolitics. The joint task force established by President Traoré began its work at dawn the following day. Led by Intelligence Chief Commander Ouedraogo and supported by the central bank's technical team, the operation initially focused on tracing the origins of the sophisticated counterfeits. The first breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Amadou Sawadogo, the central bank's chief technical analyst and a specialist in currency security features, had been examining the paper composition of the fake notes using spectral analysis equipment borrowed from the University of Ouagadougou's chemistry department. Commander, Dr. Sawadogo reported during the task force's morning briefing, I have significant findings about the paper used in these counterfeits. The briefing room, located in the secure basement of the Interior Ministry building, buzzed with tension as team members leaned forward to hear the analysis. The paper is not manufactured in Burkina Faso, or anywhere else in West Africa for that matter. The fiber composition, the chemical signatures, and most importantly, the cotton blend specifications match papers produced in only 3 facilities worldwide, 2 in Europe and 1 in Southeast Asia. Captain Ibrahim Diallo, the operations lead investigator, consulted his tablet. Can we determine which facility? Better than that? Dr. Sawadogo smiled grimly. The batch markers, invisible chemical signatures that manufacturers use for quality control, indicate this paper was produced at the Schleicher and Schul facility in Germany, approximately 8 to 10 months ago. Commander Ouedraogo felt the first stirrings of excitement. Can we trace the export of this paper? That's where our customs data becomes crucial, responded Adjutant Marie-Claire Zongo, the task force's financial investigator. She had spent the previous 18 hours combing through import records. According to customs documentation, 500 kilograms of high-grade printing paper matching these specifications entered Burkina Faso 6 months ago. Imported by whom? Première Édition Moderne, a printing company registered in Ouagadougou. The owner of record is François Ouedraogo. She paused, checking her notes. But here's where it gets interesting. 6 months ago, Mr. Ouedraogo was driving a 10-year-old Toyota and living in a modest apartment in Sector 15. Today, he owns a luxury villa in the Ouaga 2000 district and drives a brand-new Land Cruiser. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Captain Diallo broke the silence. That's quite a business improvement for a small printing company. It gets better, Zongo continued. Along with the paper, Ouedraogo imported specialized inks, UV-reactive chemicals, and high-precision printing equipment. The total value of these imports was approximately $200,000. Commander Ouedraogo leaned back in his chair. And where does a small-time printer get $200,000 for sophisticated equipment? Bank records show that Ouedraogo received a series of wire transfers totaling $250,000 from accounts in Dubai, Switzerland, and Luxembourg over the past 8 months. From whom? That's what we need to find out. Within hours, Francois Ouedraogo was under comprehensive surveillance. A team of the nation's most skilled intelligence operatives began documenting his every movement, phone call, and meeting. What they discovered over the next week painted a picture of a conspiracy far larger and more dangerous than anyone had initially imagined. Ouedraogo's daily routine was meticulously mapped. Every morning at 7:30, he left his villa in Ouaga 2000 and drove to his printing facility in the industrial zone. But 3 times a week, he made additional stops that seemed inconsistent with running a legitimate printing business. On Mondays, he visited the offices of Conseil Stratégique Africain, a consulting firm owned by Jérôme Caboret, a former finance minister who had been removed from office 2 years earlier amid accusations of corruption. On Wednesdays, he met with Robert Zongo, a prominent businessman and former parliamentarian known for his vocal opposition to President Traoré's policies. And on Fridays, he had extended meetings at the Hôtel Silmande with individuals whose surveillance teams identified as foreign nationals. Commander, reported Sergeant Fatou Sawadogo, the surveillance team leader, we've identified at least 6 foreign nationals who meet regularly with Ouedraogo. Based on passport scans from hotel registration, we have citizens from France, Belgium, and Ivory Coast. But there's something odd about their documentation. Odd how? The French nationals are traveling on diplomatic passports, but they're not registered with our foreign ministry as official visitors. The Belgian papers look genuine, but when we ran them through Interpol, there's no record of these individuals. And the Ivoirian documents? Let me guess, they're fake. Sophisticated fakes, but fakes nonetheless. Commander Ouedraogo realized they were dealing with an intelligence operation of significant complexity. Sergeant, I want full electronic surveillance. Phone taps, email monitoring, financial tracking, everything. And I want to know who these mystery foreigners really are. The electronic surveillance yielded a treasure trove of information. Over the next 72 hours, the task force intercepted dozens of phone calls, encrypted emails, and financial transactions that revealed the scope of the conspiracy. The most damaging interception came from a phone call between Francois Ouedraogo and an unidentified individual speaking French with a slight accent. Francois, our timeline has accelerated, the voice said. We need to move to full production immediately. But we agreed on a gradual introduction to avoid detection, Ouedraogo replied nervously. Plans have changed. The political situation is developing faster than anticipated. We need to flood the market with at least 30 billion francs in the next 2 months. 30 billion? That's impossible. The machinery can't. Then get more machinery. We're transferring an additional $500,000 to your account tomorrow. Buy whatever you need. Hire whoever you need, but meet the deadline. And if we're caught? The line went quiet for a moment before the mysterious voice responded with chilling calm. Francois, you have 2 choices. Success or elimination. There is no third option. When Commander Ouedraogo heard the recording, he immediately contacted President Traoré. The operation was no longer just about counterfeiting. They were looking at a plot to destabilize the government itself. President Traoré's decision was swift and decisive. After reviewing the surveillance recordings and intelligence reports, he authorized an immediate raid on Francois Ouedraogo's printing facility. But this would not be a routine law enforcement action. It would be a military operation designed to capture both the perpetrators and the evidence. Needed to expose the full scope of the conspiracy. I want this done tonight, the president told Defense Minister Colonel Ouedraogo during an emergency meeting at 10 p.m. We cannot risk them destroying evidence or escaping. This is our one chance to catch them in the act. The operation was meticulously planned. Colonel Ouedraogo would lead a team of 50 elite soldiers from the Presidential Security Regiment, supported by intelligence officers and technical experts from the central bank. The plan called for complete encirclement of the printing facility, simultaneous raids on the homes of key conspirators, and the seizure of all equipment, materials, and documentation. At 11:45 p.m., President Traoré arrived at the military command post established 2 kilometers from the target location. Against the strong objections of his security detail, he had insisted on personally supervising the operation. "Sir," pleaded Colonel Ouedraogo, "your presence here is unnecessarily risky. If something goes wrong with this operation, Colonel, there may not be a country left to govern," the president replied firmly. "This conspiracy threatens the very foundation of our sovereignty. I will be here to see it ended." At exactly midnight, the surveillance team reported suspicious activity at the printing facility. "Command, this is Eagle 1. Multiple vehicles approaching the target. Lights are on inside the building. It appears they're conducting a night production run." President Traoré felt a surge of vindication. "They're playing right into our hands. Colonel, initiate the operation. All units, this is command. Operation Monetary Shield is now active. Move to your positions." Through night vision binoculars, President Traoré watched as his forces deployed with military precision. Sniper teams took positions on surrounding buildings, assault teams moved to cover all exits, and technical specialists prepared to secure evidence and prevent the destruction of materials. At 12:30 a.m., Colonel Ouedraogo's voice crackled over the radio. "All units in position. Building is surrounded. No movement detected on the perimeter." From inside the facility, the sounds of machinery could be clearly heard. The counterfeiting operation was in full swing, completely unaware that it was about to be shut down. "Francois Ouedraogo and all persons inside the building," Colonel Ouedraogo's voice boomed through a megaphone. "This is the armed forces of Burkina Faso. The building is completely surrounded. Exit immediately with your hands visible and you will not be harmed." The machinery sounds stopped abruptly. Lights began going out one by one. Then came the sound of running footsteps and shouted instructions from inside. "They're trying to destroy evidence," President Traoré observed grimly. "Colonel, we go in now. Breach teams, you are cleared to enter. Priority is the preservation of evidence and equipment. Secondary is the apprehension of suspects." The assault was swift and overwhelming. Within 3 minutes, all exits were secured, and the interior of the building was under military control. What the assault teams found inside exceeded even their worst expectations. The facility contained not 1, but 4 massive printing presses capable of producing currency-quality documents. Stacks of freshly printed counterfeit francs covered multiple tables with various denominations in different stages of completion. Along one wall, sophisticated cutting and finishing equipment prepared the fake bills for circulation. But the most shocking discovery was a detailed production chart showing that the facility had already produced over 25 billion francs in counterfeit currency over the past 4 months. If accurate, this meant that nearly 10% of all currency circulating in Burkina Faso might be fake. "Mr. President," called Captain Diallo from across the facility, "you need to see this." In a secured office area, the assault team had discovered an operational planning board that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. Names, dates, financial projections, and political objectives were laid out in devastating detail. The plan, codenamed Project Renaissance, called for the systematic introduction of counterfeit currency to create hyperinflation, followed by coordinated social unrest, and culminating in what the documents euphemistically referred to as governmental transition. Most damning of all was a list of co-conspirators that included former government ministers, opposition politicians, prominent businessmen, and, most shockingly, several serving military officers. "My God," President Traoré whispered as he scanned the names. This wasn't just counterfeiting. This was a coup attempt using economic warfare. Colonel Ouedraogo approached with a preliminary report. "Sir, we've apprehended 12 individuals, including Francois Ouedraogo. We've also seized 4 printing presses, approximately 500 million francs in completed counterfeits, and extensive documentation." "And the quality of the fakes?" Sir, I cannot distinguish them from authentic currency. Without specialized equipment, these would fool anyone. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, President Traoré stood among the seized evidence, understanding that his nation had narrowly avoided an unprecedented economic attack. But he also knew that the real work was just beginning, exposing the full network and ensuring that those responsible faced justice. The interrogations began immediately. In a secure facility normally reserved for terrorism suspects, the 12 individuals captured during the raid found themselves facing teams of skilled interrogators backed by overwhelming evidence. President Traoré had given clear instructions. Extract every detail of the conspiracy. Identify every collaborator and trace every financial connection. François Ouedraogo, the ostensible leader of the counterfeiting operation, proved to be the weakest link in the chain. Faced with boxes of evidence from his facility and recordings of his incriminating phone calls, he broke within hours. I never wanted to be part of this, he sobbed to his interrogators. They approached me 6 months ago. They said it would be simple printing work, nothing illegal. Who approached you? Demanded Prosecutor Alassane Ouattara, who had been specially appointed to lead the legal investigation. Jérôme Caboret, the former finance minister. He said they had a business proposition that would make me rich. What exactly did he propose? Ouedraogo's hands shook as he recounted the meeting. He said they needed someone with printing capabilities for a special project. They told me it was related to government financial planning, creating prototype currency for economic modeling. And you believed that? At first, yes. Caboret had been a government minister. I thought it was legitimate, but when they brought the actual plates and specifications, Ouedraogo's voice trailed off. You realized you were being asked to counterfeit currency? Yes. And when I tried to back out, they made it clear that wasn't an option. They threatened you. They showed me photos of my wife and children. They knew where my children went to school, where my wife worked. They said if I didn't cooperate, my family would face consequences. This revelation added kidnapping and terroristic threats to the growing list of charges. But more importantly, it confirmed that the operation was being run by individuals with significant intelligence capabilities. François, Prosecutor Ouattara continued, we need names. Everyone involved, everyone who contacted you, everyone who received money or counterfeit currency. Over the next 6 hours, Ouedraogo provided a detailed account of the conspiracy that revealed its staggering scope. The operation involved at least 30 individuals across multiple countries, with funding sources traced to banks in Dubai, Luxembourg, Switzerland, and several African nations. But the most explosive revelations came from Pascal Tapsoba, the technical manager of the printing facility. Unlike Ouedraogo, who had been coerced into participation, Tapsoba had been a willing participant until he realized the true objectives of the operation. They told us we were going to save Burkina Faso, Tapsoba told his interrogators. They said President Traoré was leading the country toward dictatorship and that economic pressure was the only way to restore democracy. Who told you this? Several people. But the main coordinator was Robert Zongo. He held meetings every 2 weeks where he explained the political necessity of our actions. What did he say exactly? Tapsoba consulted notes he had kept throughout his involvement. He said that Traoré's policies were isolating Burkina Faso from the international community, that his connections with Russia and China were dangerous for West African stability, that the only way to restore proper governance was to create enough economic pressure to force a change in leadership. And how was counterfeiting supposed to achieve this? The plan was to introduce fake currency gradually over 6 months, creating inflation and economic uncertainty. This would lead to public protests and strikes. Eventually, the military would intervene to restore order, and a transitional government would be established. Who would lead this transitional government? Jérôme Caboret was supposed to be the interim prime minister. This confession confirmed President Traoré's worst fears. The counterfeiting operation was indeed a sophisticated coup attempt, designed to create the conditions for regime change without the risks associated with traditional military coups. But the most damning testimony came from an unexpected source. Among those arrested during the raid was Dr. Michel Durand. a French national who had been posing as an economic consultant but was actually coordinating the international aspects of the operation. Dr. Durand initially refused to cooperate, demanding to speak with French diplomatic representatives. However, when presented with evidence that her diplomatic passport was fraudulent and that she faced decades in prison for economic terrorism, her resolve cracked. "This operation is bigger than Burkina Faso," she finally admitted. "Project Renaissance is a pilot program. If successful here, similar operations were planned for Mali, Niger, and Guinea. Planned by whom? By people who understand that the current wave of anti-Western sentiment in West Africa threatens strategic interests. Economic destabilization is considered a more subtle alternative to military intervention." "Which strategic interests?" Dr. Durand hesitated, then spoke with the weariness of someone who had realized her mission had failed catastrophically. "Mining rights, military base agreements, currency arrangements. When governments like Traoré's begin asserting real independence, they threaten relationships that have existed for decades. So this was state-sponsored? Not officially. But there are networks, private organizations with government connections, that take action when official channels are inadequate. When President Traoré received transcripts of these interrogations, he understood that Burkina Faso had been the target of a new form of warfare, economic destabilization designed to appear as organic political upheaval while actually serving foreign strategic interests. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking in its audacity and terrifying in its implications for African sovereignty. As news of the foiled conspiracy began to circulate through secure diplomatic channels, the reaction across Africa was swift and decisive. President Traoré's decision to share intelligence with his closest allies, the leaders of Mali and Niger, triggered a continent-wide investigation into similar activities. The first confirmation came from Niger's President Abdourahmane Tiani within 48 hours of receiving Traoré's briefing. "Brother Ibrahim," he said during a secure video conference, "we've discovered similar activities in Niamey. Not as advanced as what you uncovered, but the pattern is identical." Niger's intelligence services had identified suspicious printing equipment imports and unusual currency circulation patterns that, in light of Burkina Faso's discoveries, clearly indicated a parallel counterfeiting operation. "How extensive?" President Traoré asked. "We estimate they were in the preparatory stages. Perhaps 2 to 3 billion CFA francs in fake currency produced, but not yet widely circulated. Your rapid response may have prevented them from fully activating their operation here." Mali's President Assimi Goïta joined the call with equally disturbing news. "Gentlemen, we have arrested 5 individuals in Bamako who were found with high-quality counterfeit currency matching the specifications Ibrahim provided. Our investigation suggests they were distribution agents for a broader network. The 3 leaders realized they were confronting a coordinated attack on the monetary systems of the Sahel region, sophisticated attempt to destabilize the governments that had been most vocal about asserting African sovereignty. This confirms our suspicions about the international scope of this conspiracy," President Traoré observed. "We are not dealing with isolated criminal enterprises, but with a coordinated campaign of economic warfare." President Tiani leaned forward on the video screen. "What do you recommend as our response?" "First, we share intelligence completely. Every detail, every connection, every piece of evidence. Second, we coordinate our investigations to identify all participants across our borders. Third, we prepare a joint response that demonstrates to the world and to our enemies that attacks on one of us will be treated as attacks on all of us." Within 72 hours, the 3 presidents had established the Sahel Economic Security Commission, a joint task force dedicated to investigating and preventing economic warfare against their nations. The commission was granted unprecedented authority to coordinate intelligence, law enforcement, and financial security measures across borders. The investigation rapidly expanded beyond the 3 founding nations. When Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo was briefed on the conspiracy, his government immediately launched Operation Golden Shield, a comprehensive audit of currency circulation and import records. Within a week, Ghanaian authorities had identified and raided 3 Facilities suspected of producing counterfeit West African currencies. The sophistication of these operations suggests months or years of planning, reported Ghana's finance minister during an emergency meeting of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. We are looking at an attack on the monetary stability of our entire region. Similar discoveries followed across the continent. Kenya reported seizing fake dollars and euros that appeared connected to the same network. Tanzania found evidence of counterfeit printing facilities targeting East African currencies. Even South Africa discovered suspicious activities targeting the rand. The pattern was unmistakable, a coordinated campaign of economic destabilization, targeting the most strategically important African nations. Dr. Akinwumi Adesina, president of the African Development Bank, called an emergency meeting of African finance ministers to address the crisis. What we are witnessing is economic terrorism of unprecedented sophistication, he told the assembled ministers. This represents a new form of warfare designed to undermine African economic sovereignty without the political costs associated with traditional military intervention. The continental response was swift and comprehensive. The African Union authorized the creation of the African Monetary Defense Initiative, AMDI, with headquarters in Addis Ababa and operational centers in each regional economic community. AMDI's mandate was extensive: develop continental standards for currency security, establish intelligence sharing protocols for economic crimes, create rapid response capabilities for monetary crises, and coordinate with international law enforcement agencies to prosecute transnational economic terrorism. President Traoré was unanimously selected to chair AMDI's governing council, a recognition of Burkina Faso's leadership in exposing and defeating the conspiracy. This attack has revealed both our vulnerabilities and our strengths, President Traoré told the African Union Assembly during an emergency session. Our vulnerability is that our monetary systems were not designed to defend against this level of sophisticated attack. Our strength is that when we unite, when we share intelligence and coordinate our responses, we are capable of defeating any threat. The address was broadcast across the continent and received with standing ovations in national parliaments from Cairo to Cape Town. Africa was demonstrating that it would not passively accept economic warfare as a tool of foreign policy. But perhaps the most significant response came from an unexpected source. China's President Xi Jinping, who called President Traoré personally to offer assistance. President Traoré, the Chinese leader said through interpreters, what you have uncovered affects global monetary stability. China is prepared to share our most advanced currency security technologies and provide whatever technical assistance you need to ensure this never happens again. Russia's President Vladimir Putin followed with a similar offer, as did leaders from several other nations that had been strengthening ties with Africa. The conspiracy had backfired spectacularly. Instead of isolating African governments, it had strengthened their resolve and expanded their international support. 3 months after the midnight raid, Ouagadougou's Palace of Justice was transformed into the venue for what international media dubbed the trial of the century. The proceedings would not only determine the fate of the conspirators, but also expose the full scope of the economic warfare campaign against African sovereignty. President Traoré had insisted on complete transparency. The world must see the evidence, he declared. The world must understand what was attempted here and why it failed. The trial was broadcast live across Africa and streamed internationally with simultaneous translation into 15 languages. The presiding judge, Madam Justice Fatimata Ouattara, one of West Africa's most respected jurists, had been specially appointed to ensure the proceedings met the highest international standards. The prosecution, led by Chief Prosecutor Alassane Sankara, had assembled a case file containing over 10,000 pages of evidence, hundreds of hours of surveillance recordings, financial records from 12 countries, and testimony from more than 200 witnesses. Your Honor, Prosecutor Sankara began his opening statement. The defendants stand accused not merely of counterfeiting currency, but of economic terrorism designed to overthrow a legitimately elected government and destabilize an entire region. The courtroom, packed with journalists, diplomats, and observers from across Africa, fell silent as the prosecutor outlined the scope of the conspiracy. The evidence will show that this was not a criminal enterprise motivated by personal enrichment, but a sophisticated operation designed to serve foreign strategic interests through the destruction of Burkina Faso's economic sovereignty. The first phase of the trial focused on establishing the technical aspects of the counterfeiting operation. Dr. Amadou Sawadogo, the central bank's chief technical analyst, presented a detailed analysis of the fake currency that left even the defense attorneys visibly shaken. The quality of these counterfeits represents technology available to only a handful of facilities worldwide, Dr. Sawadogo testified. The paper composition, ink formulations, and security feature replications required access to classified information about our currency specifications. When shown enlarged microscopic images of the counterfeit notes alongside genuine currency, the courtroom gasped. The fakes were so sophisticated that even under extreme magnification, only the most subtle differences were visible. How would ordinary citizens have detected these fakes? Asked Judge Owatara. They would not have, Your Honor. These counterfeits were designed to be undetectable through normal handling and even through most bank verification procedures. The economic impact testimony proved even more devastating. Finance Minister Bongui presented an analysis showing that if the full 30 billion francs had been successfully introduced into circulation, it would have triggered catastrophic inflation potentially reaching 400% annually. The economic destruction would have been immediate and severe, Minister Bongui testified. Within months, we would have seen the collapse of purchasing power, the destruction of savings, and the complete breakdown of financial confidence. The social consequences would have been revolution, chaos, and ultimately, the collapse of our government. But the most dramatic moments came during the testimony of the conspirators themselves. François Ouédraogo, the nominal leader of the counterfeiting operation, broke down completely while describing how he had been coerced into participation. They showed me photographs of my children walking to school, he sobbed. They knew my wife's work schedule, my family's routine. They made it clear that cooperation was the only way to ensure my family's safety. However, it was the testimony of former Finance Minister Jérôme Traoré that truly shocked the nation. Traoré, who had initially denied all involvement, finally confessed under the weight of overwhelming evidence. Yes, I coordinated the political aspects of the operation, he admitted, his voice barely audible. But we believed we were saving our country from dictatorship. By destroying its economy? Prosecutor Sankara pressed. By creating the conditions necessary for democratic transition, Traoré replied defensively. And who convinced you that economic terrorism was a tool of democracy? Traoré hesitated, then named names that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Representatives from European strategic consulting firms. They explained that President Traoré's policies were isolating Burkina Faso from the international community and that intervention was necessary. What kind of intervention did they propose? Economic pressure to force political change. They said it was preferable to military intervention. And you agreed to help them destroy your own country's economy? I believed it would lead to better governance. The international dimensions of the conspiracy became clear during the testimony of Dr. Michel Durand, the French intelligence operative who had been coordinating the international aspects of the operation. Under intense cross-examination, Dr. Durand revealed the existence of what she called parallel diplomatic networks, unofficial organizations with government connections that operated in Africa to advance strategic interests without direct state involvement. These networks exist because official diplomacy has limitations, she testified. When governments like Traoré's begin policies that threaten long-standing relationships, alternative approaches become necessary. Alternative approaches like economic terrorism, Prosecutor Sankara demanded, like economic pressure designed to encourage policy reconsideration? By destroying the livelihoods of 22 million people? Dr. Durand's silence spoke volumes. Perhaps the most damaging testimony came from Robert Zongo, the prominent businessman who had recruited domestic collaborators for the operation. Zongo's detailed account of his recruitment by foreign operatives revealed the sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques used to convince Burkinabe citizens to betray their own country. They began by expressing concern about President Traoré's authoritarian tendencies, Zongo testified. They suggested that economic pressure was necessary to restore democratic governance and reconnect Burkina Faso with the international community. Did you believe these justifications? Initially, yes. They presented detailed analyses of government policies, economic projections, and political assessments that seemed credible. When did you realize the true nature of the operation? When they provided the technical specifications for the counterfeiting operation, it became clear that we were not engaged in political advocacy, but in economic warfare. Why did you continue? Zongo's voice broke. By then, I was too deeply involved to withdraw. They made it clear that exposure would mean prison, financial ruin, and threats to my family. The trial revealed a sophisticated recruitment and coercion system that had ensnared dozens of Burkinabe citizens through a combination of ideological manipulation, financial incentives, and ultimately, threats and blackmail. As the trial proceeded, its implications extended far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The detailed evidence of foreign involvement in an attempt to destabilize an African government through economic warfare triggered diplomatic crises across multiple continents. The most immediate impact was felt in Paris, where the French government faced intense scrutiny over Dr. Michel Durand's revelations about parallel diplomatic networks. Opposition. Parties in the French parliament demanded emergency sessions to investigate government, knowledge of operations targeting African governments if French citizens, even unofficial ones, are engaging in economic terrorism against our African partners. This represents a catastrophic failure of our diplomatic principles, declared Marie-Christine Blandin, leader of the French Green Party. We demand a full parliamentary investigation. The French Foreign Ministry initially denied any knowledge of Dr. Durand's activities, issuing a statement that France categorically condemns any form of economic manipulation or interference in the sovereign affairs of African nations. However, leaked diplomatic cables published by investigative journalists revealed extensive discussions within French diplomatic circles about economic pressure, mechanisms for dealing with problematic African governments. The scandal deepened when it was revealed that Dr. Durand had been operating under a diplomatic passport that, while technically fraudulent, had been issued through channels with apparent government connections. In Brussels, the European Union faced similar pressures, as evidence emerged that some of the funding for the counterfeiting operation had been channeled through European banks and shell companies registered in EU jurisdictions. European Parliament member Michel Rivasi demanded emergency hearings. If European financial institutions and legal frameworks are being used to destabilize African governments, we need immediate investigations and reforms to prevent such abuse. The scandal reached the United States when financial records revealed that some of the initial seed funding for the operation had been transferred through American banks, albeit through a complex network of shell companies that obscured the ultimate source. Senator Elizabeth Warren called for Senate Banking Committee hearings. American financial institutions cannot be used as conduits for economic terrorism, regardless of the political motivations involved. But perhaps the most significant international response came from China and Russia, who saw the conspiracy as validation of their warnings about Western economic imperialism in Africa. Chinese Premier Li Qiang issued a strong statement. The attempted economic destruction of Burkina Faso demonstrates why African nations must diversify their economic partnerships and develop independent financial systems, resistant to external manipulation. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov was even more direct. This conspiracy confirms what we have long argued, that Western powers view Africa not as partners, but as subjects to be controlled through any means necessary, including economic terrorism. These responses created a diplomatic crisis for Western nations, who found their African partnerships undermined by the revelations from the trial. The African Union's response was swift and decisive. In an emergency session, the Continental Body passed Resolution 1847, which established new protocols for investigating and prosecuting economic crimes against member states. The resolution also created the African Economic Defense Treaty, which committed all member states to treat economic attacks against any African nation as attacks against the entire continent. President Kagame of Rwanda, serving as chairman of the African Union, delivered a landmark address that was broadcast across the continent. The conspiracy against Burkina Faso was not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern of economic manipulation designed to maintain Africa in a state of dependence. Today we declare that this era is over. Africa will defend its economic sovereignty with the same determination with which we defended our political independence. The treaty established several groundbreaking mechanisms: a continental early warning system for economic attacks, shared intelligence, protocols for financial crimes, mutual defense, commitments for monetary stability coordinated, sanctions against entities involved in economic warfare, technical assistance programs for currency, security. Perhaps most significantly, the treaty authorized the creation of the African Monetary Defense Fund, capitalized at $50 billion to provide emergency support to any member state facing economic attack. The fund received immediate support from unexpected sources. China pledged $10 billion in support. Russia committed $5 billion, and several other non-Western nations made substantial contributions. This fund ensures that no African nation will face economic warfare alone, declared President Traoré during the fund's inauguration ceremony. Any attempt to destabilize one of us will be met with the full financial resources of our continent. The international business community also began reassessing their African strategies in light of the revelations. Several major multinational corporations issued statements distancing themselves from any form of economic manipulation and pledging to respect African sovereignty in their business practices. However, the conspiracy had also strengthened Africa's resolve to develop independent economic institutions. The African Development Bank announced an accelerated program to establish continent-wide payment systems that would reduce dependence on Western financial networks. The planned African Continental Free Trade Area received renewed momentum as leaders saw economic integration as a defense against external manipulation. Economic unity is economic security, President Traoré observed during an ECOWAS summit. The conspiracy against Burkina Faso succeeded in one respect. It convinced us that our survival depends on our unity. After 6 weeks of testimony, evidence presentation, and legal arguments, the trial reached its climax. Judge Ouattara's courtroom was packed beyond capacity as she prepared to deliver verdicts that would resonate far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The anticipation was palpable as Judge Ouattara began reading the verdicts. The courtroom fell into complete silence, broken only by the clicks of cameras and the scratch of journalists' pens. In the case of the people of Burkina Faso versus François Ouedraogo and others, Judge Ouattara began, her voice carrying the weight of history. This court finds the evidence of a conspiracy to commit economic terrorism to be overwhelming and irrefutable. She methodically addressed each defendant. François Ouedraogo, despite his cooperation and claims of coercion, was found guilty of counterfeiting, economic terrorism, and money laundering. However, his sentence was reduced to 15 years due to his cooperation with authorities. The court recognizes that you were coerced into participation, but also notes that you continued the operation long after you understood its true nature. Former Finance Minister Jérôme Caboret received the harshest sentence: life imprisonment without possibility of parole for 25 years. You betrayed the highest trust placed in you by the people of Burkina Faso, Judge Ouattara declared. Your actions could have destroyed the economic foundation of our nation. Robert Zongo was sentenced to 30 years imprisonment for his role in recruiting domestic collaborators and facilitating the operation. Dr. Michel Durand, the French intelligence operative, received a 35-year sentence for economic terrorism and espionage. Your actions represent a form of warfare against the people of Burkina Faso that is as destructive as any military attack. The technical staff who had been coerced into participation received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years, with provisions for early release based on continued cooperation with ongoing investigations. Most significantly, Judge Ouattara ordered the forfeiture of all assets connected to the conspiracy, totaling over $50 million in bank accounts, real estate, and equipment, to be used for economic recovery programs. But the judge's final comments resonated most powerfully. This conspiracy represents more than criminal activity. It represents an attack on the sovereignty and dignity of the African people. Today's verdicts send a clear message that such attacks will be met with the full force of our laws and the united response of our continent. As the verdicts were announced, crowds gathered in streets across Ouagadougou erupted in celebration. Similar scenes played out in cities across Africa, where the trial had been followed with intense interest. President Traoré's response was measured but firm. Justice has been served, but our work is not complete. We must now focus on ensuring that such an attack can never succeed against any African nation again. 1 month after the trial concluded, President Traoré announced that the seized counterfeit currency would be destroyed in a public ceremony that would symbolize Burkina Faso's victory over economic terrorism. The ceremony was planned for Revolution Square in the heart of Ouagadougou, with representatives from across Africa invited to witness what was being called the burning of deception. On the day of the ceremony, over 100,000 people gathered in and around Revolution Square. Delegations from 47 African nations were present, along with representatives from China, Russia, and several other countries that had supported Burkina Faso during the crisis. The counterfeit bills, 30 billion francs worth, were arranged in a specially constructed furnace designed to ensure complete destruction, while preventing environmental contamination. Each stack of fake currency was sealed in transparent containers so observers could witness the burning process. President Traoré, flanked by Presidents Goïta of Mali and Tiani of Niger, approached the furnace carrying a torch lit from the eternal flame at the National Heroes Memorial. Today, President Traoré announced to the massive crowd and television audiences across Africa, we do not merely burn fake money. We burn the illusion that Africa can be conquered through deception. We burn the fantasy that our people can be impoverished and our governments destabilized through economic manipulation. As he lit the furnace, the crowd erupted in cheers. The flames quickly consumed the counterfeit bills, creating a towering blaze that was visible for miles. Let this fire carry a message to anyone who would attack Africa's economic sovereignty, President Traoré continued. Your schemes will be exposed, your conspiracies will be defeated, and your weapons will be turned to ash. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of the African Economic Sovereignty Monument, a towering sculpture depicting hands from across the continent joining together to shield a flame representing Africa's economic independence. Inscribed on the monument's base were the words, "In memory of the conspiracy defeated and in promise of the sovereignty protected, Africa united, Africa strong, Africa free." 2 years after Operation Monetary Shield exposed and defeated the counterfeit conspiracy, its impact continued to reverberate across Africa and beyond. Burkina Faso had emerged stronger and more economically integrated with its African partners than ever before. The seized assets from the conspiracy had funded new schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, projects that became symbols of the nation's resilience. The African Monetary Defense Initiative had evolved into a continental institution, rivaling the International Monetary Fund in its influence over African economic policy. AMDI's currency security protocols had been adopted by 52 African nations, creating an integrated system that made large-scale counterfeiting operations virtually impossible. President Traoré's leadership during the crisis had elevated him to continental stature. He was unanimously elected as the first chairman of the African Economic Sovereignty Council, a new institution created to coordinate responses to external economic threats. The conspiracy had also accelerated Africa's economic integration, The African Continental Free Trade Area was fully operational 2 years ahead of schedule, powered by the recognition that economic unity was essential for security. Perhaps most importantly, the defeat of the conspiracy had fundamentally altered Africa's relationship with the global economy. No longer were African nations willing to accept economic policies dictated by external powers. The continent had demonstrated its ability to defend its interests and had gained the confidence to chart its own economic destiny. In international relations, the conspiracy's exposure had triggered a broader conversation about economic warfare and the limits of acceptable diplomatic pressure. New international protocols were being developed to prevent the use of counterfeiting and other economic weapons against sovereign nations. For President Traoré personally, the victory had validated his vision of an independent, sovereign Africa capable of defending its interests against any threat. Standing in his office 2 years later, looking out at a Ouagadougou skyline dotted with new construction funded by the seized conspiracy assets, he reflected on how the attack intended to destroy his government had instead strengthened his nation and his continent. The counterfeit conspiracy had been defeated not just by superior intelligence and law enforcement, but by the power of African unity and the determination of a people who refused to accept economic subjugation. As he often told visitors, "They tried to conquer us with fake money, but they only succeeded in teaching us the value of real independence." The lesson of Operation Monetary Shield had become a cornerstone of African policy. Economic sovereignty, like political independence, must be actively defended. And when Africa stands united, no external force can prevail against it. In classrooms across the continent, children now learned about the conspiracy as a turning point in African history, the moment when Africa proved it could not be conquered by deception, manipulation, or economic warfare. The story of how a young bank clerk's sharp eyes, a president's decisive leadership, and a continent's united response defeated one of the most sophisticated attacks ever launched against African sovereignty had become legend. And in that legend, Africa found both pride in its past and confidence in its future, a future where economic independence was not just an aspiration, but a reality defended by the united strength of a continent that had learned the true value of sovereignty. The story of Operation Monetary Shield serves as a testament to the power of vigilance, unity, and decisive leadership in defending economic sovereignty. While this narrative is fictional, it reflects the real challenges and opportunities facing Africa in the 21st century as the continent works to achieve true economic independence and defend its interests against all forms of external manipulation.